Hey there, welcome to the next lesson in my course on creating 5-year financial models in Excel. If you haven't seen the previous videos, you can find links to them in the description below. And if you want to download the Excel files and follow along, you can do so on the first link in the description below. Now let's get back to Excel. In the previous video, we calculated our non-operating expenses and implemented the logic for our taxes. Now let's go ahead and build our debt schedule so we'll be able to forecast our interest, which is the last item that we need to figure out in order to have fully forecasted the next 5 years of our income statement performance. We go up here, gonna just select those. Control plus to add a few more lines here. Of course, I don't want all those to be gray. Just switch that to no fill. And what we'll have here is our debt schedule. And this is a new section. I'm just gonna select this whole thing, format painter, and have it over here. So the way a debt schedule usually works is we have our opening balance, the new debt that's taken on by the company, and then some debt amortization that we use to reduce the balance and arrive at the closing balance. We also calculate the interest expense, and the easiest way to do those is to create a simple debt repayment schedule. And for this purpose, we need to know the terms of the loan. Even if we don't know it, we can always make some assumptions, but in this case, we have those. If you open the debt summary from your resources, you see that we have debt in our holding entity, we have our debt in the pipeline entity, and we also have general terms for new acquisitions. So let's go back and start building our debt repayment schedule. First thing, our opening balance. Then we'll have new debt, amortization, and our closing balance. And then those two, make those bold, as those are the ones that we care about. And I'm also gonna underline this one and this one as it's our ending calculation. Let's just have a line at the top and the bottom. We can start from 2023. Our closing balance will be the sum of our opening balance, new debt, and debt amortization. And I'll need this. I think pretty much everything is blue because we copied the formatting from there. So let's just select everything here. Make sure that it's all numbers and make sure it's all black. Copy that to the side, and before we can calculate those up here, we need to have a debt repayment schedule. Above it, we also have our interest expense. I'm gonna grab this formatting from here, and here's gonna be our debt repayment schedule. We need here is the principal starting balance, which is 150 million. But since we're working in thousands, it's just 150,000 here. We also have our interest rate, which is 6%. Show one more. We have our term in years, which is 10 years. And we have our start date, which is the 1st of January 2020. I want all those to be blue because they're inputs. I'm gonna bold them. And I'm also gonna add a line here to close the whole thing off. Well, let's start building it here. What we need the year. And I don't want any of this to be italic. So on the year, the period number, the opening balance, the repayment, the interest, the principal portion of the repayment, and the closing balance. Both all of those, right align them, and have a line at the bottom. So we're starting from 2020. We can do that dynamically by the year formula. So this is 2020. I don't want this to be like a number. I want it to be a year. So this plus 1, and also make that the general formatting, and we can copy it down all the way to, let's say, 2029, which is 10 years, and I can just have our line here. This will be our first period, and we can increment it from there on. And you see I messed up my line here, and the best way to fix that is, instead of putting the line below where we're going to be copying formulas down, just select the next row and put a line at the top. So now if I delete those, if I use Ctrl-D to copy down, my line is still there. So my opening balance initially will be my 150 million, and I don't want anything here to be bolded. My closing balance will be the sum of the opening balance and the repayment. Copy that down, and each next opening balance is going to be the previous closing balance. Copy that down, and now we have the structure. All that's left is to calculate the principal, the interest, and the total repayment. We can use some formulas from Excel. So PMT calculates the payment for a loan. What we need here is we need the rate, and I'm gonna fix that with F4, as we don't want it to change the reference when we're copying the formula down. Then the number of periods is 10, I'm gonna fix that as well, and the present value is 150 million, and I'm gonna fix this one as well. Going down, and you see that we're getting at a negative closing balance, which shouldn't work, and there's an error that we did actually. Here is the total repayment, and it includes both interest and principal. And we're supposed to only decrease the balance with the principal. And that's a really common mistake, especially when you're working with longer period loans and you're only calculating the years that you need. That's a really common mistake. So make sure that instead of adding these two, our closing balance is our opening balance plus our principal, which is going to be with a negative sign. Copy that to the bottom. Let's calculate the principal. It's going to be PPMT, which is the principal payment, and it's going to take the rate fixed with F4. It's going to take the current period, and we're not going to fix this because we want it to move with the formula. The number of periods is 10, fixes with F4, and the present value is 150 million. And this will calculate only the principal repayment, and you see that at the end of the 10 periods, we end up with a 0 closing balance, which is exactly what we're aiming for. We also need to calculate our interest, which is IPMT for interest payment, and it takes the rate fixed with F4, the current period, don't fix it, total number of periods, again fixed with F4, and the present value of 150 million, again fixed with F4. Copy this down with Ctrl-D, and we have it here. Now let's go ahead and fill our schedule up here. I'm actually gonna grab this whole thing just to make it stand out a bit more. Just gonna highlight it in gray. So our opening balance at 2023 is down here. You can either take the closing balance at 22 or the opening balance at 23. Gonna make this dark brown because the rest of those will just be equal to the previous closing balance, and I want it to be obvious that this one is different from the rest of the formulas here. Then our new debt is usually an assumption that we add, so I'm gonna make it blue and type 0 everywhere because we don't plan to take any new debt in this entity, but I'm still gonna leave the possibility to add that at a future time if we decide to change our strategy. And I just want to make sure that I have the place to add it and that it's gonna flow through everywhere. Of course, if we end up adding new debt here, we'll need to make sure that for each new debt we have our repayment schedule, and we are accumulating the debt amortization from this debt and any potential new debt added. And when we're working on the acquisitions pipeline, I'm going to show you how to make it easily in a dynamic way where it wouldn't matter where you add any new debt, it would all be automatically calculated. Our debt amortization, we can use the SUMIFS formula. Just grab our principal here, fix it with F4 for our sum range. And for our criteria range, we want to make sure that the year here, again, fixed with F4, matches the year up here. I can compare to this because if you remember, this is a number that we just formatted to look as a year. I'll press enter, copy that to the side, and you can see that by 2027, we'll be left with 37,365,000. And if we come down here and check it, that's exactly correct. We can use a similar formula for our interest expense. SUMIFS, my sum range will be my interest, fixed with F4, and my criteria range will be my year, fixed with F4, and my criteria will be the current year. Here we have the interest. So for the next 5 years, we're going to pay 25.5 million of interest. And let's see if this matches. 25.5, yeah. Now that we have our interest expense, we can link it in our income statement and it will be complete. Come down here and remember that we're showing expenses with positive sign here. So I'm gonna use minus and link my interest expense up here. Copy that to the side and there you have it, our complete income statement. You see here that we have an error because it's an inconsistent formula, because the formula above and below both reference total operating expenses. So we can just click ignore if you're bothered by the green triangles. Before we move on with the cash conversion cycle, which will help us forecast accounts receivable, inventory, and you see that we don't have those here, but still accounts payable we have. And those three are known as the net working capital elements. And we use the cash conversion cycle to easily forecast them going forward based on historical performance. Before we do that, let's go ahead and add a new sheet. Move it to the front and me just apply some formatting. I'm gonna name this changelog. It's not necessary to have it, and to be honest, I often forget to fill changes in my changelog, but it's quite important, especially if you plan to spend more time on the model, meaning that it's going to iterate over a longer period of time, or if you plan to share it with someone. I don't need those two. All I need is a date and some notes, and remove those as well. Zoom in a bit. The reason I want to do that is first because if I have the dates of all the changes, I can use that, and then on my cover tab, which we're going to build later on, I can have a formula that shows me the last date that I made any changes. And it's also easier to go ahead and track what we've been doing. So what I do here is, let's say, have a date of September 1st, 22. Formatted to be left aligned, and I want to say implemented basic three statements model. I can actually have like the same date and add different notes. Over the course, we won't be keeping a detailed track of what we're doing, but I urge you to do it because it would be much easier to navigate the model once you're done. It's just a good habit to have in order to make your models easier to track. Now that we're done with our income statement, we can actually go ahead in our balance sheet and link our debt closing balance, because we already have it. So this is going to be equal to our closing balance up here. Copy that to the side. And the next one we can do is we can look at the working capital, which is our accounts receivable, inventory, and accounts payable. And although we don't have accounts receivable and inventory here, We'll still build the functionality for it because then we can reuse it for all our other models for the entities that have those line items in their balance sheet. So let's go ahead up in our assumptions. And I'm just gonna grab this clean line and insert it above this one. And then we can add numerous lines. Yep, those should probably be enough. And here, we're gonna grab heading and take cash conversion cycle. So there are 3 sections that we need here. And the first one is accounts receivable. Just format that and bold it. And the way we calculate the accounts receivable cash conversion cycle is we have the days in the period, and those are always 365 when we're working on an annual basis. Copy that to the side. Of course, there are leap years, but we usually don't go into so much detail. Plus, it would kind of hinder our possibility to change the starting year later on. So just usually stick with 365 and it's okay. Then we have our accounts receivable days, our revenue, our average balance, our opening balance, and our closing balance. And this is what we're looking for, our closing balance. That's what we want to forecast going forward. So how does this work? You can download the PDF from the resources. That's an article I've written on cash conversion cycle. But in a nutshell, the idea is that we're taking the average balance and see how many days it takes us to turn this balance back into cash. By knowing how much days it takes, we can use the same number of days and our revenue from the income statement to forecast our closing balance. The way we calculate accounts receivable days, the formula is, and I'm gonna wrap it with if error, because right now when we have a 0 accounts receivable, it won't work. And the way we calculate it is we take the average balance of accounts receivable, divide it over the revenue, and multiply this by the number of days in the period. And if this is an error, just give me 0. Copy this to the side. Then our revenue, we can just link from our income statement. Our average balance will be the average of the below 2. And this is only going to be for the reference periods. And actually the accounts receivable days, we're calculating only for the reference periods. Here we don't have an opening balance. So I'm just going to mark that in gray, and I'm gonna link the closing balance to my accounts receivable from the balance sheet. Here it is. Copy that to the side for the first 3, and then the opening balance is the closing balance from the previous period. And that's pretty much always the case, so we can copy it to the side as well. Then from here on, we'll have our accounts receivable days as our assumption. And usually we can do a moving average here as well. Take the average of those 3, bring it to the side, and then we can reverse the formula for the accounts receivable days from here and say that our average balance is our accounts receivable days over the total number of days multiplied by our revenue. Copy that to the side, and our closing balance is our average balance multiplied by 2 minus the opening balance here. Let's go ahead and build the accounts payables one, and probably make more sense. We're going to grab the whole thing, paste it once more, and rename it to accounts payable. Days is the same. Here we have accounts payable days, And usually what I do here is base this off of operating expenses from the income statement. If let's say your accounts payable are mostly linked to like cost of goods sold or some other line item, you can opt to focus only on this one. But usually taking like the total expenses works pretty good. So let's link our total operating expenses here. Copy that to the side. Then we don't have an opening balance. Our closing balance will be our closing balance of accounts payable. And this is going to be true for those three. And you can see here that we have the days are being calculated. We're then taking the average, and we are up to here. We're calculating the accounts payable days. And from here on out, we're using the operating expenses to calculate an average balance based off of the number of accounts payable days as a portion of the total days in the period, and we multiply that by the operating expenses. Then we use the previous opening balance and this average balance to calculate the closing balance. And that's pretty much the whole idea. We are assuming that if our balances turned over in this many days, just a bit high for accounts payable actually, but those are just dummy data for all the entities. So we're not going to focus that much on whether it's realistic or not, but still in some specific businesses, you can get to really huge accounts payable days. And this would usually entail that you have great terms from your suppliers. Maybe you're like in a really dominant position where your suppliers really rely on you, and therefore they're giving you huge credit terms in order to keep you happy and keep you using them for your purchasing needs. Okay, now that we have our accounts payable, let's just go ahead and link them as well. And we actually forgot to link our accounts receivable, even though there's 0. Let's link them up here. Accounts receivable, closing balance. Copy it over to the side, and our accounts payable, we're gonna link to here. Third part of the cash conversion cycle is the inventory. So we can copy this once more and add our inventory here. You're gonna have inventory. This is gonna be inventory days. And you're gonna base that off of our supplies line item in our expenses. Let's link that to our supplies. Copy it over to the side. This formula is fine, the average is fine, and we need the closing balance to be our inventory closing balance. For those three, Control R to copy it to the side, and the rest would calculate if there were any numbers down below. Let's go ahead and link our inventory in our balance sheet. And that's it. The reason we built it here, even though we don't have accounts receivable and inventory, is because going forward for all the other entities, we won't start from scratch. Just make a copy of this full model and then adjust the assumptions and change the historical financials, which would make it much easier for us to replicate all the logic that we're now building. And reusing the same model also allows us to go through all the calculations once more as we're adjusting them and make sure that we catch as many errors as possible. Let's finish it off by calculating our net working capital, which is our closing balance of our accounts receivable plus the closing balance of inventory minus the closing balance of accounts payable. And let's add one more line, which is going to be the change in net working capital, which we need for our cash flow statement. It's going to be equal to this one minus the previous one. That was it for this video. Check the article, the PDF, and the resources to make sure you understand the theoretical concept behind the calculations that we just did. Thank you for watching another part of the course. As soon as the next video is uploaded, you'll find it right here. By the way, if you can spare a minute, I would love to hear your thoughts on the course and whether it's living up to your expectations. If you're watching on the website, you can do so by the feedback button up there. And if you're watching on YouTube, just drop a comment down below. Thank you.